very quick. Welcome. Hello. Welcome to our April 2026 Chicago Ruby Meetup. As a reminder, we aim to meet every first Wednesday of the month. We want to thank PayPal and the folks at PayPal for letting us use their lovely space and for being such a great host. With that, I'll hand the metaphorical mic over to Lolita, who will tell us a little bit more about PayPal.
Hi, everybody. My name is Lolita. I work at PayPal. I've been here for about 3 years. PayPal, if you haven't heard of it, is an app where you can send and receive money. It processes payments, does all kinds of things. We also own Venmo. We are a Rails and Java shop. So I work on the Braintree side of things, where I'm the actual money funder, mover between merchants and customers. We are a Rails shop. We've always been a Rails shop, even before we were acquired by PayPal. And we're very happy to be hosting this event. We're hoping to do more of this in the future with you. So please make yourself at home. Again, there's snacks, there's drinks. If you have any questions about the company at all, please feel free to ask me. I'll be around until the very end.
Thank you so much. Okay. From the Chicago Ruby organizers, myself, Anton, Dan, and Josh, we just want to thank you all for coming and joining us today. Some quick housekeeping and announcements. First, join us for our future events. We'll post our events on meetup.com as well as on Slack. Speaking of Slack, we have our own Chicago Ruby channel on the Ruby Central Community Slack, as well as the #Ruby channel within Chicago Tech Slack. These Slack channels will be a place for us to connect, as well as where Chicago Ruby organizers, such as myself, will post any announcements prior to our events. We've created QR codes for invitation to these Slack channels that I mentioned, and then reach out to me if you need an invite to any of these as well. Missed the previous event or want to rewatch a talk? We have our 2025 and 2026 event recordings posted on our YouTube channel, our Ruby Meetups. Feel free to give our channel and videos a like and subscribe. Interested in hosting? Chicago Ruby is on the lookout for organizations willing to host our monthly meetings. If interested, reach out to Anton, Dan, Josh, or myself, and we can give you more info. Interested in speaking? We would love to hear from you. Feel free to reach out to me for more information on speaking at Chicago Ruby. If you're interested in speaking, but aren't sure what topic to choose, or if there's a subject you'd like to see covered, we could put together a list of potential topics that members of the community are eager to learn more about. This QR code will send you to that list. Feel free to add your idea on that spreadsheet. For moderation purposes, this Google spreadsheet is open for comment only, and admins like myself will add those ideas from the comments onto that list. Chicago Ruby is proudly supported by GoTo Inc. GoTo Inc. is a UX, UI, and engineering talent as a service provider for Ruby-powered organizations. We're incredibly grateful for the support of GoTo Inc. And the support GoTo Inc. has given to our community. If you'd like to learn more about what they do, be sure to connect with Anton, who's in attendance today. If you're interested in Chicago Ruby, either by hosting a different type of event, like a hack night, code and coffee, collaboration with other groups, or through a sponsorship, we are so down. Reach out to me for more info on sponsorships and hosting events. Some job announcements before I get through this. You'll have to check our Slack channel for the job posting since I didn't add a slide on my slide deck for this month. But Chime has open positions in their Chicago office for a senior level support engineer as well as a backend engineer. If interested, check out the job posting on hashtag #ChicagoRuby channel within the Ruby Central community Slack. Again, reach out to me if you need an invite to that Slack channel. If you or your company are hiring and want us to highlight your open positions at the next Chicago Ruby Meetup, feel free to reach out to Chicago Ruby organizers such as myself, and we can get that set up for you. Yeah. Second to last thing, join us next month. AlphaSense will be hosting our May Meetup Thursday, May 7th. 6 p.m. to 8:30. Please note that our next event is on a Thursday as opposed to our typical Wednesday cadence. Today is Wednesday, next month, Thursday. Yeah, Hillary Stowe-Kraus is joining us in person, coming from Madison, and Ifat Rubon will also be coming in person to give us her talk that she's presenting at Blue Ridge Ruby. And then before I move on to speakers, I am going to hand the metaphorical mic to Morgan Diamond to talk a little bit about mentorships or mentorship opportunities.
Thanks so much, Michelle. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Yep. Okay, perfect. So my name is Morgan Diamond, and I work at Discovery Partners Institute, which is part of University of Illinois' Granger School of Engineering. In my day-to-day job, I have the privilege of working with adult learners who are changing careers and pivoting into tech. Our program is actually in the process of restructuring, but our last cohort before the restructure ended back in March, and we are seeking mentors to help them launch their careers into tech. So they spent the last 6 months learning Ruby on Rails and developing full stack web applications. And with that foundation, some of them are now specializing in things like database administration, cybersecurity, and some want to stick with software engineering and development. So what I'm here today to do is just ask for anybody who would be willing to serve as a micro mentor. So essentially what that means is just working with them either virtually or in person for 3 to 4 times just to review their resume, give some career guidance, do a mock interview, those kinds of things. I'm just going to drop in the chat really quickly, and I'll also throw this on Slack, on the Slack channel, mentor form. So if you could just fill that out at your earliest convenience or whenever it's convenient for you, we'd really appreciate it. We've already connected with about 3 or 4 people from this community, and we're looking for 3 or 4 more. Again, thank you so much for those of you who've already stepped up to the plate, and appreciate your time today. Thanks.
All right. With that, I am going to stop screen sharing and then have Joel take over.
All right, let's see if I can get everything to work properly. Last time I presented remotely, I had to reinstall an old version of Zoom to get it to work. So I'm hoping that this goes more smoothly than that. I think this is good. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Can you see me?
Yeah.
And can you see my slides?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, wait, it all worked on the first try? That's a great sign. Awesome. Well, thank you for having me back again. I think I presented last year, if I'm not mistaken. If you can remind me, Anton or Michelle. Yeah, thank you for having me back. I'm really excited to share my talk with you all. Oh my gosh, we really have our first technical problem. Let's see if this works now. There we go. Okay, so as many of you know, the senior role is a real crossroads for us as engineers. At many companies, it's basically the farthest you're allowed to go as an individual contributor. You basically have one option, which is to move into management. But it doesn't have to be this way. Your journey as an individual contributor can go much farther and definitely not stop at senior. So a quick survey for all of you. How many people here would call themselves junior? And this is the part where I'm realizing I can't see any of you. How would I know how many people are raising their hand? Can someone who is there and can see tell me how many people are raising their hand who are junior?
Two, three.
Okay, a couple juniors. How many people would say they are senior? One. How many people are staff or beyond?
Three or four.
Three or four? Okay, so a good mix. Cool. So, as I'm kind of alluding to, there is sometimes another option beyond senior, and a lot of places we call this the staff or the staff plus track. So, a little over a year ago, my friend Jesse from Stripe gave a talk at our local meetup, Boulder Ruby, about what it means to be a senior engineer. And at the time, I took a note, and people asked me about doing a talk about being at the staff level. So, since then, I've kind of taken note of some common questions I get about being a staff engineer. And I'm kind of asked really three questions, which is, what did your promotion packet look like? Because they all seem to be different. What is your job? And that sounds really scary. How do you survive doing it, let alone thrive? So today I'm going to attempt to answer those questions based on my experiences and conversations I've had with other staff engineers inside and outside of GitHub. My goal, sharing it with you all in kind of a more intimate setting, is that you'll poke tons of holes in what I have to say and help me improve my talk ahead of giving it this fall at Rocky Mountain Ruby in Boulder. So my name is Joel. I live in Boulder, Colorado with my wife and our two very young boys. In fact, that is really part of the reason why I'm speaking with you today and why I was speaking here last year was that I've really tried to stop traveling for work as much as possible so I can spend more time with my family. So I really appreciate getting to speak to you remotely because of that. So I currently work at GitHub as a staff engineer, and I am very fortunate to spend my full time just working on Ruby and Rails and the health of our monolith. And that means often doing a lot of open source stuff. In fact, I'm currently working on the Herb project, which is a re-implementation of ActionView. So I think it goes without saying, but what I'm sharing here is just my opinion. It's not the opinion of GitHub, certainly not of GitHub's HR department or of any of the previous employers I'm going to mention here. So first, how did I get promoted? Well, I got into software engineering through the side door. I actually spent a couple of years in a very thrilling career as a news photographer, doing a lot of sports work. Before I started my tech career at Mojitech, which is a software consultancy, where I worked as a junior apprentice. This was kind of back before code schools were common. So from there, I spent about 6 months at junior, and then I was promoted to mid. And then about a year later, I was promoted to what we call lead developer, which was basically senior. There were no levels beyond that. And my next job, I worked at a startup with 3 engineers, including the CTO, and I was hired as a senior, whatever that meant, because there was only one level. And we had no level beyond senior, no level below it. And I reported directly to the CTO. I left for another startup where my title was also senior, but we had a few more levels. We had junior, mid, senior, lead, and VP. So I spent 6 months at senior, and then I was promoted to lead. There were about 24 engineers at this company, and I reported as a lead directly to the VP of engineering. I also confusingly had one engineer who reported to me, which was kind of the worst of both worlds. So I was basically what you'd call like a tech lead manager. From there, I joined GitHub as a mid, which meant that I effectively went down 2 levels. So I went from lead to down to senior, down to mid. GitHub maybe had 300 engineers at the time, and we had a total of 8 levels. So we had intern or junior, mid 1, 2, 3, senior, staff, principal, and distinguished. And that system remains largely the same today. And we have like, call it 1,000, 1,200 engineers. So my path to a staff role at GitHub started a couple of months into my job. I had the idea for a Vue component, and at the time I was a mid, and I pitched it to my manager, and he said, "Okay, that's cool. Go spend 20% of your time, a couple hours a day or one day a week, and see what comes of it." So after a few months, I had a working prototype, and that was actually the basis of my first ever talk that I gave at conferences. A year and a half after I joined, I was promoted to senior in large part due to that initial work on the Vue component project. Around that time, I was at an offsite and I ran into Diana, who is the leader of our design systems organization, and I pitched her on the idea that we should build out Primer, our design system in Vue Component. A few months later, I made the request to join her team to work on Vue Component full time, and my request was granted. So that 20% project became a full-time job. As the summer of 2020 rolled around, there was a request for projects to address technical debt in our monolith. So I proposed having people build out and adopt Vue components for our Primer design system with the goal of increasing the consistency and quality of our user interfaces. I ended up leading a virtual team of about a dozen engineers for about half the year, like summer and fall. And we just basically built and adopted Vue components. It was pretty substantial. So the following spring, I was promoted to staff for this work. That was kind of what you'd call like my staff project, effectively. So now I've been at staff for about 5 years. So what is my job? What does it mean to be a staff engineer? At many companies, the senior level is considered terminal, and that it's totally okay to never go beyond senior for your entire career. We have people that have worked at GitHub for a decade and have not gone beyond senior. At least at GitHub, I've yet to hear about someone at senior being pressured to be promoted beyond management or staff or otherwise. So the staff level is beyond terminal. It's really something that you choose to pursue. And it can take a long time. Some folks, like I said, spend a decade at the senior level before they even think about staff. And it can be disorienting after getting promoted every year or two sometimes for the earlier levels. Like I've seen people go from intern to staff in 6 years. Like that's really quick. So in general, sorry, did someone say something? I thought I heard someone interject. Anyways, sorry. So in general, staff engineers work at a broader scope than senior engineers, and that can mean breadth or depth or even both. So while a senior engineer typically works at the team level, a staff engineer might work on problems that span multiple teams, potentially across even different organizations at a company. They might report to a director instead of a team level manager, working across, say, all the directors' teams. And that's what I did for basically the first 5 years of being a staff engineer up until just a couple months ago. I now report directly to a manager. You might also go deep in your broader scope. So one analogy we use for technical depth at GitHub is about rope. And this comes, I believe, from the Radford scale, which is that a junior, their main job is to learning about rope in this metaphor. A mid-engineer can tie basic knots on their own. They have some independence. A senior engineer knows a lot about knots and they can start to make value judgments about technical decisions. A staff engineer is going to understand something more fundamental, like they might understand rope making, to use the metaphor. In my case, it was I grew to have a deep understanding of how action view and its related technologies work. A principal engineer knows more about rope than you ever will. Sometimes we say that you are maybe an industry expert at your discipline or your areas of expertise. And then a distinguished engineer invented nylon. And in our case, that means that you're a PhD, most likely, inventing new critical technologies. Like, for example, we have a custom code search engine that is a code-specific search engine that was invented by one of our distinguished engineers. So we talked about depth and breadth of impact, but it also might be a larger scope when it comes to time. So you might work on problems that take months or even years to solve. So that could mean leading a major product launch or a really difficult technical migration that takes a long time. But perhaps the best definition of the staff role is the archetypes from Will Larson's staff engineer book. Those are tech lead, architect, solver, and right hand. So I'll read some quotes from the book to describe these. A tech lead guides the approach and execution of a particular team. They partner closely with a single manager, but sometimes they partner with 2 or 3 managers within a focused area. Some companies also have a tech lead manager role, the one I didn't like, which is similar to the tech lead's archetype, but exists on the engineering manager ladder and includes people management responsibilities. I've done this tech lead role, I think I counted 4 times now at GitHub. And each time I've done that, it was covering for the absence of one of my director's managers. So often what happens is someone has a kid and goes on paternity leave and they take a few months off. And I've offered or been asked to step in and basically do one-on-ones with their reports, serve as a hiring manager in a few cases, like actually hire engineers for their team in their absence, and even helping with performance reviews. An architect is responsible for the direction, quality, and approach within a critical area. They combine in-depth knowledge of technical constraints, user needs, and organization-level leadership. So most of my work on Vue component at GitHub has fallen into this bucket, such as when I organized the effort to migrate a large portion of our code base to use primer Vue components. A solver digs deep into arbitrarily complex problems and finds an appropriate path forward. Some focus on a specific area for long periods, while others bounce from hotspot to hotspot as guided by organizational leadership. So my initial work on Vue component really fell into this category. I worked with Aaron Patterson to develop the original patch to Rails that was the fundamental core technical change that needed to happen to make Vue component even possible. And lastly, right hand extends an executive's attention, borrowing their scope and authority to operate particularly complex organizations. They provide additional leadership bandwidth to leaders of large-scale organizations. And this is also one that I've fallen into a lot. So, for example, I'm often asked to kind of ghost write the initial draft of my director's quarterly, semester, yearly, and even multi-year plans. And I'm asked to do that because part of being a staff engineer is often mentoring and pairing with engineers across an organization. And it's a really good way to take what I've learned from those pairing sessions and use it to kind of have what we call ground up or bottom up planning, where I propose ideas I've seen other ICs in the organization come up with. I also work on proposals for opening new engineering roles if I see an opportunity to hire someone, for example. I've also gone through the process of hiring contractors and even working with third-party vendors to evaluate new tools and services. So you get more scope and you work within the 4 archetypes. I think it's pretty fun. So how do you survive when you're doing all this work? So there's a few tricks I found, and I'll share them now. So I think the most important thing, if you were to take anything away from this talk, and this applies to any level really, which is that use the archetypes to align with your manager to make sure that your expectations are the same for a given project. We should be regularly validating that our manager agrees with how we think about our work. I've run into situations where I thought I was supposed to be an architect, but my manager wanted me to be a solver. And that kind of dissonance can be really painful if it's not addressed quickly. And kind of an aspect of that is that something I've really struggled with is seeing other staff engineers at GitHub do really impressive things in other archetypes and feeling like an imposter for not being like them. The reality for us is that this is almost always the case, is that there's rarely a business need for there to really be 2 staff engineers that do similar things. So continuously checking in with my manager on what I'm working on helps me overcome this worry and really further define my specific version of staff. It also speaks to a conundrum I've seen many seniors looking for promotion to staff struggle with. There has to be a business need for a staff role. So if you're on a team with other staff engineers, it's generally harder to get promoted than if no one else is staff. And I'll be honest with you, I know that my promotion to staff was probably easier than most because I was the first staff engineer under my promoting director at the time. And what's sad about this is that it can feel really unfair. And honestly, it feels unfair because it is unfair. At some point, you need to do staff level work to be promoted to staff, and there might not be any in your area, or in some cases, even at the company you're working at, if it's a small company. your manager should help you determine where those staff opportunities might be, but it doesn't hurt to ask around either because there might be a different team, for example. So a couple of years ago, I adapted Julia Evans' brag doc into a daily practice where I write this daily internally visible journal of what I worked on and what I kind of like read, listened to, or watched. And I was first motivated to do this to keep a record for my self reviews, but I quickly found that it was a helpful tool for guiding my focus towards things that were actually worth writing down, like things that were impactful. It's really easy to get bogged down in activity that has no impact. I've also gotten feedback that has helped others in the organization understand my role. So part of having an impact at a breadth and depth beyond senior is looking towards the future. What are the internal trends, technical and non-technical, that could affect the part of the company that you work in? What about external trends? Are there new technologies we should experiment with? What is our competition doing technically that could make our customers want to use their product? So I at least try, and to varying degrees of success, I try to avoid just reading Twitter and all the social media, fire hoses. So I subscribe to a couple of newsletters. I really like the Hacker newsletter, which summarizes Hacker news, although I still end up reading it most days. Ruby Weekly is excellent for Ruby news. And then I'll usually pick like a topic specific newsletter. So like I worked on accessibility for a while, so I would read the WebAIM newsletter, which was great. This was like especially important when I worked on accessibility because the legal landscape was constantly evolving and it actually had real impacts on what work we prioritized. And kind of as a result of that, successful staff engineers are often cited by colleagues as sources of knowledge. This even comes up in interviews. One of our criteria that we look for when we're hiring someone at the staff level is whether, when we interview them, whether they teach us something new during, say, technical pairing. And one more note on that. In fact, it's sometimes that's such a key signal for us that I've had senior candidates that we're interviewing and they performed so strongly and taught me and other interviewers so much that we actually advocated for and got a staff position for them. So as an IC, I've often had moments where I feel like leadership didn't care about what I cared about, whether it's code quality, tech debt, or just, what we sometimes call software craftsmanship. And I see part of our job as staff engineers as representing the technical concerns of the engineering discipline to people in power outside of engineering. And that can mean being a check and balance on the product discipline. This is often by, surfacing and justifying those engineering driven priorities. And how to do this depends a lot on the situation, but using data is kind of a good way of creating a shared understanding of a problem. And sometimes that's literally what you are assigned to do. I actually think this is the part of the job I like the least. Sometimes my manager or director will message me and say, these two people are disagreeing about something. Come in and can you help settle the disagreement? And this can be really risky because you don't want to parachute in and act like you know it all, even when that's kind of what you're being asked to do. That being said, this doesn't mean that you get to do whatever you want. In fact, it's quite the opposite. As you go beyond senior, you are expected to be in tune and aligned with the business. Being promoted to staff is a strong signal that the company trusts that your judgment is aligning with the broader company goals. I believe that a good staff engineer is really continuously looking to disambiguate and then delegate. And what that means is taking the work that they're given and downgrading its complexity with the goal of handing it off to someone else. Anytime I'm given a new problem, I ask myself, what will it take to have a senior or even a whole team work on this? Often this comes through maybe creating proofs of concept, reading papers, trying new technologies, and often connecting with people outside of GitHub to validate the right solution to an ambiguous problem we haven't seen before. So for example, one big problem I was given was the very broad task of defining our strategy for prioritizing which parts of our application to audit and remediate for accessibility. So what I did is I used our data warehouse, and this is actually the query that I ran. And I used it to produce a report showing the distribution of traffic across the about 2,000 pages that we have in the GitHub code base. And what this did is it highlighted which pages were used by the average user in a given week. And what this helped us do was identify really the few dozen product areas that we should prioritize. And we started working with those teams. And in fact, this is a heuristic. I did it in October of 2024. We are still using this kind of usage-based model to prioritize that work. In another case, to give an example from a peer, my colleague John Rohan was tasked with finding a replacement for our use of styled components, which was how we styled all of our hundreds, if not thousands, of React components at the time. So he looked to see what others in the industry were doing. He tried a few new technologies, such as CSS layers that had recently become mature. And he did a couple proofs of concept, all before leading a team of about a half dozen engineers to make the migration to CSS modules. And he did it all with very little, if really any bugs, which was really impressive. So more generally, this can mean just being the person in meetings who pushes for clear definitions of problems or proposed solutions and success criteria. Another way that staff engineers are really impactful at GitHub is what we call generating energy. So part of generating energy is really taking the lead and initiating work and not just waiting to be told what to do or being given projects to work on. We expect our staff engineers to be this kind of source of creative fuel in our teams. And succeeding in such a large scope of impact is really difficult if you can't inspire others to join you on whatever you're working on. So for example, when I was working on that big migration to a Vue component, a good chunk of my daily responsibilities were around motivating other people, whether it was pair programming, hosting office hours, or writing kind of like a journal case study of our work's impact. It was actually very little code. Another big part of generating energy is building up others around you. As staff is often a terminal role, there is an expectation that you won't be hogging the opportunities to look good. In many cases, at least in my situation, you're rewarded for doing the opposite. A big difference between senior and staff is how much you're expected to focus on getting other people promoted through mentoring and leveling up those around you. So for example, we've been doing this right now. I regularly help seniors write up like internal blog posts and even external ones as well. Whenever I see someone solving an interesting problem that I think will make a good blog post, I'll hit them up and help them write something up. And lastly, I think maybe kind of the most obvious part of being a staff engineer is that it's your job to do big, important things in an impactful way. Like, we lean on our staff engineers to come through when we need it most. And that can be whether something has to ship on time or say you have a really critical project that's stalled or a service is failing its SLA in like a new way we haven't seen before. We rely on staff engineers and the levels above staff to solve our trickiest problems. And this pressure is not for everyone. I don't get these projects all the time. I've only had a couple in my time here, but they've all been very thrilling. So for my colleague John, beyond the CSS modules work, one example of a critical project was migrating all of GitHub.com to be responsive. And shortly after that, spending 2 years implementing dark mode with very few regressions. Delivering success like this is really the surest path to being promoted to staff. Do enough impactful big things, and at some point, you become so senior that it's really unfair to other senior engineers to have the same title as you. A metaphor I like to use for this aspect is skiing. So on a typical day, I ski kind of the middle difficulty runs, which are blues. But on a powder day, when conditions are easier, I can handle the blacks. But if it hasn't snowed in a week or months like it did this winter in Colorado, and there's ice everywhere, I have to ski on lower difficulty slopes, which are called greens. And software projects can take a similar shape. Under normal conditions, you might be expected to do a project that is typical for your level. But when the pressure is lower, you might be expected to stretch beyond your level and do something a little more difficult. Versus under high pressure, you might be given a lower difficulty project, but expected to deliver it in half the time. So some of the staff projects I've been given have been a project you typically give a senior, but it needed to be done 2 weeks ago and it's behind schedule. So that's how I got to staff, what forms my job takes, and ways I found to thrive in the role. But I have a secret to tell you. This talk was actually not about being a staff engineer. This talk was about being an engineer, period. But your path to staff should begin with these behaviors long before you go up for promotion, and even if you don't want to go to the level. The staff engineer job isn't for everyone, and it doesn't need to be. It's just fine to stay at senior or move into management. But I think you should consider a path towards staff in your career. I found my years in the role to be the most fulfilling of my time as a software engineer, and it might just be for you too. Thank you. And I want to thank my peers, John, Matt, Sean, and Marty for doing a lot of review of this talk. Thank you. I'm realizing you're clapping and I cannot hear you. Were you talking? Were you trying to talk to me? Oh, no. No. I can't hear any of you. Well, does anyone have any questions or comments?
Can you hear us?
Now I can hear you. Yeah. Oh, you just have great noise suppression, but it cuts out the clapping. Oh man, bummer. Anyways. Yeah, good old Zoom. Well, any questions or comments? The thing is, I might even be able to hear you if you're saying them because Zoom might be cutting you out. So. Well, cool. Well, thank you all. Oh, sure.
I have one question. Do you think it's for a lot of people, is it easier to get into staff level by being hired from like senior to staff or within an internal promotion?
Oh, I have an even better answer for you, which is that if I were to go get another role somewhere else, I would purposely not get a staff role. Because I think I've observed it at GitHub that we often encourage people, if they're right on the edge, to take a senior role when they join, get their footing, and then go up for staff, like in a quick promo cycle, which we'd call like 12 to 18 months. I think that starting staff at a company, even having been staff 5 years at GitHub, unless it was a much smaller company, it scares the crap out of me. Because getting into a company and having the kind of impact that we expect at these higher levels is difficult. It is much harder than doing it having been at the company for a while. Like, I like to tell people that my job as a staff engineer gets easier every day because I have more context. I have more relationships with the company. So the inverse is true. If you start staff day one with none of those things, I think your job is disproportionately hard relative to starting at lower levels. So I would strongly encourage people to, if they want to go to staff and it's possible at their company, to prefer that path whenever possible. David says the nitty-gritty responsibility of someone above senior probably differs a bit from company to company, I would think. I would argue that it differs as much person to person at GitHub as it does company to company. Like, what I was trying to get at in the talk is that, like, no two staff engineers at GitHub are alike. And in fact, it's like pretty hard to find similarities. There's some broad stroke similarities, but there's so much variety that, yeah, the details are very different. Right?
Thank you so much, Cole.
You're welcome. Thank you all for having me.
If you want, you can share your social details over here or on the Slack channel. Or you can just email it to me and I can share it. Yes.
Yeah, I'm Joel Hawksley most places. I did reactivate my LinkedIn. Yes. Yeah, I've been posting again. I've been getting into blogging this year. Yeah. So I have blog posts if you want to read my blog, including a blog post of this talk. If you'd prefer, if you'd like to share it in written form. I also have a kind of a sub blog post on the work journal practice specifically, because I got a lot of questions on that last time I gave the talk. Cool. Thank you all.
Like 5-10 minutes, and then just like go to the bathroom, do whatever, and while Tally gets set up. Yeah. Yes. 7:05.
Thank you. See you again. Nice to see you too. Thank you, mustache.
That's what it was.
Yeah, it's fun. Definitely not from America.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. How you been, good sir?
You were crazy for suggesting things to the open.
Bro, that's why I put that extra in your face.
Yeah. I just figure out so getting more than trying. And I decided to reach out to some sort of where they thought that we were because what I found is that I found two things. One is a lot of these job openings, so many people are applying for the jobs that they get a pile of AI generated applications. And also sometimes there are people that unfortunately are tending to be local, but they're actually overseas. They're trying to do some overseas arbitrage. And some one of the scams I've seen, and I've literally seen this in actually a Slack group, is they'll approach you and say, we would like to use your profile, like your name, your background to apply for the job. And when the actual job happens, you go and we will have somebody overseas do the actual work. Customers questions. That's when I was at that. Knows what?
Oh, we did.
So
I've seen your tattoo.
hey, might have been at that one.
No, I was there at the Cisco one. The first one I went to was the Tasty Trade one, like a month ago. Yeah.
Yeah, reputation, ethics, security concerns have got about this.
A lot of people use Ruby.
I was surprised.
A lot of people use Ruby.
Like, how many people use Ruby for not?
Okay, you guys can, okay, you didn't have to ask that. Okay, they use it.
I'm coming in hot. I'm coming in here hot.
So how did you know?
Oh, like, yeah. It's kind of
To give me a.
Why would they make that decision?
And then right now, I don't use Ruby at my workplace, but I would just like to.
part of my
There's a lot of things that were built on Ruby. Right.
I personally,
Like Java's Elixir. It's like,
Yeah.
I haven't cracked it up. The calls I've gotten in the last month is when I've announced their openings.
Version of something called Browse Me.
Went around with
Compose
some
Ruby
really
and
Rails
make it
openings for Chicago people. If you're a senior, let me know.
Really fast to start.
Came
And
in, like a few people actually DM'd
Isn't that
me,
what
which I
Homebrew
thought was funny because it's like,
Homebrew uses.
just saying, yeah, if you have
Maybe
Yeah.
they copy
your
it.
Rails job.
because Homebrew is like an executable that was written in Ruby.
It's not gonna try to get like maybe 3 or 4 people.
Yes.
Yeah.
Apply for company.
Mhm.
I'm like, fail, I need to do better.
tools that are
But I did try to go
written
through
in
a
Ruby
vetting process
to
where I like made them
what
camera,
things are people
I
making
put
with
the
Ruby.
background, kind of get a feel for like.
That's not
what
Ruby,
they might be at.
Braintree.
Uh,
Oh, wait.
For was one.
Oh, yeah. You added that in there. You did. Yeah.
Bro, I was coming in hot.
Where basically a game engine.
It sounds familiar, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, big game state.
What company was this?
That's a company outside the US. It's called Joaquin. Yeah, so it's the plural of broker in Arabic. It's card games, social gaming.
Like we're now moving forward, so
The
maybe
game logic is
maybe
actually
the
very
final round of
using another ways Ruby of agent. That we later migrated to Clojure, but
Oh.
hiring people like.
Well, thank you for
Look at
being.
that big because it's mostly AI generated anyway. I know people.
Come in.
Coming up.
No, I have nothing against it. I learned Ruby a little over maybe 15 years ago.
Yeah.
I was playing on Code Academy back in the day.
Dang.
And
I've had somebody who I'm pretty sure was just.
Code Academy is like,
Hindsight, but at the time I thought.
dang, Code Academy had a Ruby? Code Academy existed before? Yes, it had to.
yeah, they had that. They had the whole course of jQuery.
I remember the jQuery Code Academy. I remember that jQuery Code Academy. That's what made me hate jQuary.
I remember the first time I used the UMO.
I like to hate them, to be honest, and I hate it.
Mhm.
And I never use it again.
Yeah, it made me so turn off.
Mhm.
Turn my eye off.
I've never used jQuery professionally, but I used it in that Code Academy. And I was like, no, this is horrendous.
It's interesting how front-end frameworks can actually do.
Yeah, they go. Many have. Y'all remember CoffeeScript?
No, it's been 8 months and I.
That's a well.
You to speak of.
That's a well.
From.
Was that
Famous?
JavaScript holding me accountable. He's like.
No, that was the type. It was like TypeScript before TypeScript.
Problem, but that was consultancy.
But it was janky. It was janky.
Or
Yeah.
Aaron.
Remember Adobe Flash?
I do remember Flash.
Whatever.
You remember Silverlight? Microsoft.
So
What is Silverlight? Is that what it's called? Silver
we used to
Blue?
go like to web pages that ask you to enable Flash.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Or Naval Soul.
Yeah. Silverlight. That's what it's called. Silverlight. Yeah.
So the thing that I'm looking at right now is
Emphasize nothing dies.
risk reduction.
Backward
In
framework.
specifically the software engineer.
Backward code and backward framework.
Backwards?
Back end stuff.
Oh,
So,
yeah.
like this quarter.
We're gonna get rid of C once we finish this
Customer
wall.
facing issues.
So you see.
Relationship with the
Yeah, I don't.
It's not that bad.
they actually tell me the money's on the line. Usually they, with my previous employees, usually they keep that under wraps. On my team, they actually tell me like, hey, I need you to prioritize this because it's this much dollars on the line. I'm like, oh, do that?
Yeah, Zig's just not 1.0. Zig is just not 1.0. So Zig, yeah, I'm a big Zig fan as well, but I don't use it in anything production. It's not 1.0.
I also
If we do successfully
that talked about,
customers, which
I think, a language called Elm.
did,
Elm, yep. Yes, I've never used Elm, but I'm aware of it.
Yeah, it's a functional programming.
Yeah. Yeah.
Elm was,
programs here in this
that's something
building.
that's, functional.
Exactly, yeah.
And they were saying
Like,
that
it's supposed to be like a 5-year
that
contract.
they lost their job because there's no one's anymore. Because of how.
Good, yeah.
That was.
Yeah. That's what they get. They got a code in that job. What are you doing? Why are you not adding some icing bugs?
We don't have enough resources to. The customer facing issues, but we also don't want to lose them out.
Yeah.
And so my thinking is not you know, CIO, CTO is like, I need pulling too many directions. I need somebody who can just come over here.
What about you?
I work at Samsara.
Pulling people over here. That's an angle I'm considering. Is saying, well,
Oh, okay.
Operations.
maybe that gets.
Nice, yeah.
But
Yeah,
we use
be separate from
Python.
Mary, so be
Absolutely no.
Oh, yeah. Python's horrendous. Literally horrible.
evenings and weekends give you maybe.
Yeah.
3 hours a day.
Yeah, literally.
And then see if
Oh
this
my
helps. You know, it's kind of the, it's like, it's like the metaphor of, you don't have to marry me, we can just go out on dates.
Oh, yeah.
Well, let's see.
Long gone.
Python is
See what
like
happens
the
when it works out.
Python
Then
is just
see
its
what
own version of just JavaScript, where they just put it in everything that it really shouldn't. It was never made to be.
so that's
I'm just like,
another angle I'm
guys,
considering.
we don't gotta put these languages in here. We really don't. We really don't.
Yeah.
That's what I agree.
So
Python.
somebody.
Oh,
No, Python.
Okay, so here's the thing. I am coming here with a Python guy, but I will join you on dogging it. So,
Oh, yeah. Python is far. Yeah.
Then go back.
Straight to that
Go
go.
back in.
It's okay.
A Stone Age.
I think with Python is like I hate all the syntactic sugar. You know, people like about Python. My thing is syntactic sugar will give you diabetes.
Would you get some knowledge out of
Yeah.
I agree.
senior staff? If you could get that, you would be hanging out less money. So.
Yeah, oh, yeah. So many. There's so many. Oh my gosh, yeah.
Remember when I like blew like remember Nathaniel?
Yes.
And he's a big Python guy.
Bro,
I
Nathaniel was saying things, and I feel like he's rage baiting.
He got like fucking BTFO'd when I showed him an efficient list comprehension can be by comparing like one list comprehension with a regular loop is like 10x.
Bro, man had the audacity to say Python was faster than JavaScript. And I'm like, bro, what are you talking about? What are you talking about, bro? In what world? In what world?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah,
Yeah.
go for it, go for it.
One of his best accomplishments was in college. He recommended his professor change one of his like computational routines away from MATLAB to Python, and it cost him a few weeks development time, and then made it slow.
Absolute Python W.
What happened?
It was like math department, so everything's a math, right? And here comes like Woody Nathaniel with this hard on Python. And everything's better when you change it to Python. And he hated MATLAB a lot. And you know, in retrospect, yeah, you know, MATLAB sucks.
Yeah, MATLAB pretty bad.
It spent like probably almost a month to read developing on the code, read Python, and by that point he had to leave. Standard research. And then they realized, wait a minute, this is actually slower. Like we had no good reason to change the Python, and he already left by that point, so he had no bearings.
Did you just drop Python or did you NumPy?
Pretty sure it was NumPy.
Why are y'all calling it that? Why are y'all calling it that? Why are you calling it that?
You have to call it Python.
Yeah, you call it Python?
What's this one called?
NumPy.
Oh, NumPy.
I thought you were rage baiting, bro. I thought you were rage baiting.
Come on, it goes to show me the numbers.
What do you guys do?
I do nonprofit work, but background's engineering.
Actually, his full-time job is
There we go. Uh-oh. What about now? Oh God. Hello? Okay, cool. Can you all hear me on the Zoom, please? Perfect. Let me start over then for everybody. Thanks everybody for being here again. Like I said, it's been a while since I've given a talk, so it feels good to be up here, kind of shaking off the dust. The title of my talk is called Your Business Workflows Are Invisible, but They Shouldn't Be. But before I get into that, like I was saying, let's go over some meta. Us engineers love data. So I got about 73 total slides. Like I said, I was aiming for about 30 minutes. I've been getting around like 35 minutes when I've been practicing it. So that's about 2.1 to 2.4 slides per minute. If 73 feels like a lot of slides, it's a good amount, but like they're not very information dense slides, so we'll be able to move through them pretty quickly. And then number 2 here, workflow equal pipeline. Like I was mentioning before, in the world of computing, we love definitions, but the definitions for workflows and pipelines like kind of overlap a lot. They kind of have some differences. There's a lot of similarities between them. I'm going to highlight some differences and some similarities throughout this talk. But for the more important thing is I'm going to use the terms workflow and pipeline interchangeably. So just so you have that edification. And then lastly, if you do miss anything, I'm basically reading a script up here. I have a lot in the speaker notes. So if you do miss any details, try to get your hands on the slide deck. I'll post it in the Slack channel. I'm sure it'll be elsewhere. So yeah, with that, let's kick things off. We're going to start off with a single question. Where does your onboarding workflow live? Now, this is assuming your onboarding workflow is a little bit more complex than just user.create, right? Like you have a complex application, there's more to it than just creating a user and sending them a welcome email. There's an actual like workflow, a little pipeline behind it, right? So if you're like most companies that I've worked with, your workflows, where do they actually live? Well, they might live across Jira ticket descriptions. Our PMs are really great. They understand business level workflows from the business. And they oftentimes put a lot of that data into your tickets. So that's kind of where they live. Sometimes they might live in some like diagram that's completely outdated. Some Sally engineer wrote it 2 years ago and half the team even knows where it lives. Maybe you're just kind of like waving your hands over your app jobs folder and you're like, all of our workflows live there. That's a common one. I've seen like just background jobs being the, stand-in for the actual workflows. And then lastly, is it just like tribal knowledge in people's heads? That's usually what it ends up being. Obviously, we're going to focus on these bottom 2 here for this talk. Yeah, so let's get into it. Sorry. Moving around my speaker notes. Cool. So we're going to look at an example of an onboarding workflow. Not that. We're going to look at an example of an onboarding workflow. And like most things with Rails, we're going to start in the controller. Hopefully you can see that in the back. Awesome. Can you see this? Great. So obviously, we create a user. And then we already hit our first issue. So is our workflow verify email job? Like, is everything in there just happening? Is that doing the whole workflow of what we need to do to onboard a user? Well, no. It's just the first step in the whole workflow and the whole pipeline, right? So we're already kind of speaking to the title of this talk in the sense that, like, where does our workflow live? Well, it doesn't really live anywhere because we don't actually have any way of, like, codifying an entire workflow. We just are kind of, like, chaining jobs together. So let's look at this verify email job to see kind of how this workflow works. So this example that I swiped from a real production application, I obviously simplified it down and removed a lot of like details and stuff so that we can like actually fit it on the slide and grok it in 35 minutes. So as you can see here in this verify email job, nothing too surprising. We look up the user from the user ID. We call verify email on that. I'm going to gloss over all business logic as we're going through this because like that's actually not what I care about with this talk. We actually care about all the extra plumbing and everything else that's going on in these jobs. So then we get to this user.update, and it's updating a timestamp on the user. So like, what are we doing this for? Well, this is also kind of another issue that we have when we have to like build our own workflows, which is state tracking. We obviously want to know where in the workflow we are, so we keep track of timestamps. That's just kind of like the easiest way of doing it. They're on the user, but like maybe there's a better place. Maybe there's a better modeling decision here. It could be like an onboardings table or some workflows model or what have you. We can put it anywhere, but for like the purpose of this talk, we're just going to shove it on the user. And then we kind of move on with our workflow into the next step, which is provision account. And again, I don't want us to like focus too much on the names of these jobs or what these jobs are doing, more just the plumbing and how each one is kind of spawning the next in the chain. So let's look at provision account job for the user, and then we run into our first guard statement. So why do we have this guard statement? Well, if we look back, we see that we have a job and queuing another job. There's actually a real big issue with doing that, and it's around atomicity or atomicness. Basically, we can't guarantee that a job is going to run completely into completion successfully. What do I mean by that? Well, say we get all the way down to provision account job, perform later. We successfully enqueue that job. It goes into the queue, sits there, sidekick or solid queue or good job or whatever we're using is about to pick that up. But as this job is finishing, as the verify email job is finishing, say we hit a network error, say we hit a Redis connection error, the process dies, a thread hangs, what have you, somebody pulls the power plug, right? What's going to happen is that verify email job is then going to fail. It's going to go back into the queue. And then all of a sudden, as we run it again, we now have two provision account jobs. So instead of so we need to guard against that, right? So that's why we have this guard statement here. These timestamps are actually doing double duty. They're also guaranteeing item potency. So what do I mean by that? Well, item potency is, I'm forgetting the definition, but basically we only want to run this once, right? We only want to provision one account for this user. So we have to guard against double execution here. So let's keep moving on. We call some service object to provision the account, sure, whatever. And then we update our timestamp. And then we get down to here, running out without any side effects. Thank you. That's what I was looking for, the side effect keyword. And then we get here to where we enqueue two jobs, this send welcome email job and this enriched lead data job. Again, don't have to worry too much about what these things are doing. You can kind of assume what they're doing. A send welcome email job is going to, send an email to the user. But what's kind of interesting here is, since these two jobs have no dependencies between each other, we can, run them in parallel. So why not just enqueue two jobs, right? Like, simple as that, like two jobs running, great. Well, this actually exacerbates our atomicity issue here. Say we get down to the send welcome email job, perform later, correctly, we correctly enqueue it, everything goes fine. And then again, we hit a Redis connection error, a network error, network hang up, server hang up, whatever. Now we're in this weird inconsistent state where we have one send welcome email job in the queue, but the provision account job failed. So it's going to retry, which is going to enqueue yet another send welcome email job, and then ideally an enriched lead data job too. So I'm really thinking about like the failure modes here and how things can go wrong and like how that exacerbates these issues when you're trying to just build this workflow, this chain of jobs. So let's look at these two jobs here. Again, kind of following a similar pattern, look up the user. We have our guard statement because we have to protect against double execution. We send out the email, we update a timestamp, and then we get this check and conditionally continue. I'm going to skip over it just for a second so we can look at the enriched lead data job. Again, similar pattern, query the user. We have our guard statement. This time we're fetching some data from an API, and then we're kind of shoving that data on the user. It'll make sense as to why we do that here in a sec. And then we get to the check and conditionally continue. So because we ran two jobs at the same time, because we shot off two jobs that, didn't have any dependencies between each other, so like they can run, independently, we actually get into this case now where we have two branches, right? Well, our workflow now is split into two. But like to continue that workflow, we need them to kind of like fan in, right? Because like we can't just have two branches just kind of hanging out doing nothing. Like we want to make sure that both of those branches succeed before we continue in our workflow. Otherwise, we get into some weird state where like we're continuing the workflow on one branch, but the other branch failed, so it should have stopped, but it didn't actually stop, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, so this is a very naive solution to kind of deal with this fan-in. But I want to kind of stress that I've seen this in production. So this line of code here should really scare you. Basically, all it's doing is checking to see if the other job is finished. And if it is, then it's like, okay, cool. I'm the last job in this branch. It is my responsibility to continue the workflow. And in this case, the continuation of the workflow is this review enrichment job. There's a lot of problems with this checking that the job is completed. For instance, say these two jobs are running pretty truly in parallel. They're both in progress. They both hit this conditional, check to see if the other one's completed. They both return in progress. They both return false. Uh-oh, now we never enqueue our review enrichment job. So this thing that's kind of like protecting against a race condition, because obviously they both can't enqueue this review enrichment job because then we have two review enrichment jobs, which we could do because we're guarding against double execution, but like now we're just getting really confusing and like why are we doing extra work when we don't even need to? So let's look at the review enrichment job. Again, similar pattern, query the user, guard statement, and then this time we're kind of coming back to that data that I said we fetched from that API. Say that data is like invalid for some reason. Say it tripped a fraud alert or something. Say it violated a unique constraint in the database as we were trying to like fetch that data. Hell, it's from a third party, so maybe it's not even in the right encoding. Maybe it's not even JSON or something that we expect. So if that happens, we need to have a human in the loop, is kind of what they call it in the workflow land. We need to have somebody manually review this data. So that's kind of what that manual review.create is kind of signifying there, is having a human come and look at this data, patch it up in however they need to. But if the data is clean, say we got a good response back and everything updated fine, great. All we have to do is update that timestamp. But wait a minute, are we there's no other job, so are we done? Is this finished? Well, I'll tell you it's not. Because we don't know how long that user is going to take to review the data, we have to continually enqueue this other job to I'm glad you're laughing. No, like seriously, because like this is the point of all of these crazy code slides. Yeah. We're enqueuing this job routinely at midnight every day to check to see, okay, are we ready yet? Can we like actually do this thing? Was the data reviewed yet? Like, can we continue and do this activate account now? Within this activate account job, you can see here that the guard, it's no longer really a guard statement, it's just a conditional. But we're checking to see if the user was flagged for review, and if they weren't, then we can continue. But otherwise, we have to check to make sure that review is completed, right? Or the review is approved. So we're really getting into like it's really hard. It's getting hard to follow, right? Like it's not obvious as to what's happening. It's like all these jobs are just kind of chained together, and we have some like really not great implementation already in there. But as you can see, like this plumbing, hopefully it looks familiar, one, because this is stuff I've encountered in production many times in different companies. But it's confusing, right? Like this sucks. This doesn't feel good. If you had a hard time following that, that's okay. That was kind of the point, is to make it confusing. I promise though that like this pain like is purposeful. We will make things better, I promise. But before we get into that, let's just kind of review some of the things that some of the issues that we saw. So for the first one, jobs blindly enqueuing other jobs. Like I said before, we don't know, like, because jobs are enqueuing other jobs, we lose atomosity. Jobs including other jobs is actually like an anti-pattern that I've seen a lot of other people try to avoid, but like it's so easy, right? Like it's just a job, like just enqueue another job to do the next step, right? Like it feels very intuitive to just fire off another job from your job. But we can't because of atomicness issues. Now you might be saying, Tyler, come on, we can get atomosity back in jobs especially when enqueuing jobs, if we use a database backed job queue, something like solid queue, good job, whatever. anything except for Sidekick, basically. Or Rescue, I think, also uses Redis. But anyway, what if we use something like solid queue or good job and wrapped everything in a database transaction? And you'd be totally correct. We would have atomosity back. We would only fire that job off if and only if like the whole database transaction commits successfully. And then we have our atomicness back. But now we're tying technical decisions to just poor implementation. And the other thing is the job queue database would have to be the same database as the application database. Big problem there is you want those two things to scale differently. Say your job queue gets dumped a million jobs for some reason. I don't know, a huge onboarding happens. Now all of a sudden, our database performance is going down, and that's affecting application performance. So that's not a great thing. We don't want to tie those two things together. So one, jobs blindly queuing other jobs, anti-pattern. Timestamp columns track workflow state. Not only do they track workflow state, but they also ensure item potency. So this is more of just like a pain of having to do this, having to remember to do this, like having to keep state ourselves, track that state. One other thing here is, say we want to add we just want to add another step to the workflow right at the very end. Well, the problem there is now we need to run a new create a whole new database migration to add another timestamp column. So now we're tying our workflow to our database schema, which that doesn't feel great. There's no reason to do that. There's no reason to tie those two together. Orchestration logic is scattered across classes. I mean, not only is it scattered across classes, it's kind of duplicated. It's also naive and incorrect. It's overly simplistic in our common cases. It's like, again, it's kind of like the build versus buy argument, where like, is the core of our business in charge of orchestrating a workflow? No. It's whatever the business is doing, like the product. That's what we want to focus on. We don't want to focus on the orchestration logic in our job classes. And lastly, there's no single source of truth for the workflow. Like I said at the very beginning, like it doesn't live anywhere. You would think for something as important as like you're flipping onboarding, you would want it to be codified somewhere, right? Like you need to be able to see it. You need to be able to reason about it. You need to be able to change it. But there's no single source of truth for that workflow. So what does this workflow actually look like? I know we kind of ran through the steps real quick, but here's actually what it looks like. Turns out that business workflows lend themselves well to workflow diagrams. So this is a workflow diagram of what I was actually showing before. Probably a lot easier to grok, verify email, goes to revision account, it fans out to send welcome email and enrich lead data, fans back in. We hit that decision based on if our enrichment data is valid. If it's not, we go to that goofy looking shape there that basically just means there's a human in the loop now. Go to manual review and then activate account and then finally the check-in. So that makes sense. Like we can read that. So I'm actually going to collapse that human in the loop stuff with this dotted line, and it'll make sense as to why we do that in a little bit. Okay, now that we kind of understand our workflow, let's refactor it. And I'm not saying let's refactor the business logic of the workflow. I'm saying let's refactor all of those jobs and all that plumbing and all that stuff that wasn't correct. Let's refactor that. So we can actually drive this refactor with the workflow diagram itself. Obviously, we want to just focus on the first two steps here. So the biggest issue we were running into, I think, was the orchestration logic, right? Like that was the stuff that kept showing up as like the issue, in my opinion. So, and this is something, again, I've encountered at a lot of different jobs, and I finally just kind of got fed up with like dealing with poor workflows, bad jobs, and queuing other jobs, other stuff like that, all of those issues that you encounter. And I created my own library called Ductwork. Ductwork is basically just an orchestration workflow library. Simple as that. With Ductwork, you start off directly with your workflow or your pipeline. It's in its own class. Sorry, moving my mouse here. It's in its own class. So it encapsulates everything that we need to know about the pipeline or workflow. The definition of the workflow lives right inside the class. using a DSL. Every workflow has to start somewhere. So we start the verify email step, obviously. That makes sense. Workflow start. This verify email step, I'm actually going to show us what those look like here in a little bit. But at first I want to focus more on what we're doing here. So we're defining these transitions between, whoa, sorry. We're defining transitions between our steps. That's what we care about. That's what this DSL allows us to do. It allows us to focus more on the relationship between the steps and the steps themselves than all of the other plumbing that we had to deal with before. So what do we do? So we're at our verify email step. We need something to flow into our provision account, something to connect to it, something to chain to it. So we just chain to it. What this does, what Ductwork is doing, is essentially it will only run this provision account step. It will only progress to the provision account step if and only if the verify email step succeeds. Simple as that. Ductwork handles all of the orchestration for us. There's no double jobbing queuing. There's no atomosity issues. There's no, you get recovery for free, all sorts of stuff. So all you have to do is define your pipeline or your workflow using the DSL, and everything else just kind of is done for you. So, like I said, let's look at a step real quickly. Steps, similar to pipelines or workflows, just inherit from a Ductwork class. In this case, Ductwork step. Steps, like any good PORO, have an initializer. The arguments to the initializer are what you pass to it when you start your workflow. We'll see that here in a second. But basically, you can pass any positional arguments you want to that first step. And then, you can do whatever you want with those arguments. In our case, obviously, we're just going to look up the user, right? That's just swiped from our previous implementation. The other part of the step is the execute method, and that's the meat. That's what actually gets called to do the step, the action of the step. So what we can do now is just airlift our logic from before and just plop it right into execute. As before, we had our user.verify email, again, glossing over that business logic of what actually happens there. And then we have our timestamp update. But the nice thing about Ductwork is it's all backed by database. All of the state is tracked for us. So we don't have to keep track of these timestamps ourselves. We can get rid of them. That's great. So like I was mentioning before, in the world of computing, there's some definitions for pipelines and workflows. One common pipelining concept, I guess, maybe it's not really a definition, it's more of a concept, is pipelining data, or having the return value of one step be the input argument to the next step. So same thing happens with Ductwork. Whatever the return value of execute is for verify email will get passed as the arguments to the initializer for provision account. So in our case, whatever user.verify email returns is the argument to provision account. Since we don't really know what it returns, maybe we want to return the user ID, right? Because every step in that workflow essentially queried what the user was and did some action on the user or looked at data on the user or mutated the user or whatever. So we have to explicitly pass that. But there's also, in Ductwork, there is the notion of global context. So what global context allows us to do is it's essentially global state that all of the workflow steps have access to. And it persists across the whole entire pipeline execution. So what we can do, instead of just passing the user ID to every single step, we can set that in the context. And now all of the steps, all they have to do is do context.get user ID, and then they can query the user from that, rather than having to use it from their input argument. Cool. So our fan out. Now we're moving on in the workflow here. And this is our fan out, right? So I've actually found it's easier to break the lines and kind of read it top down. So I'm going to do it that way. And it also is a little bit easier with slide real estate. So we have our provision account. and we fan out to both send welcome email and enrich lead data job. So how do we handle that? You know, a simple chain is like one-to-one, right? Like with verified email chains to provision account, that's only one-to-one. But Ductwork provides a lot of transition primitives, such as divide. So what this does is exactly what you think it does, really. It divides the workflow into these two branches. It goes executes both the send welcome email and enrich lead data steps at the same time. They run in true parallelism. One thing I didn't kind of mention, say we were using, oh, I don't know. Well, if we were using any job queue, when we enqueued those two jobs, we weren't getting true parallelism. If we're using something like Sidekick, what'll happen is you enqueue that first job, and because Sidekick is so fast, it'll likely pop that job off the queue and start executing it before it even enqueues that second job. So you don't really get true parallelism. It's not a huge deal. I was trying to think of an example where you really needed parallelism like that, where two things were running it basically concurrently. Couldn't think of a good example, so I just kind of glossed over it. But again, what this does, Ductwork just allows us to divide to those two branches. Now to our fan in step. Well, again, Ductwork provides a lot of great transition primitives. All we have to do is combine it into our review enrichment step. So it'll take those two branches that are running in parallel again and combine those into review enrichment. So what is the combining actually doing? Well, it won't. So what it'll do is now send welcome email and enrich lead data are both dependencies for the review enrichment step. If either of those two steps fail, all the retries get exhausted and it fails, the whole pipeline halts and nothing moves forward. We won't get to that review enrichment step. Similarly, if the two steps succeed, then that's the only way we move on to that next step. And again, there's no worry about double jobbing queues. There's no problems with like losing jobs or accidentally, missing jobbing queues or anything like that. All that's handled for us. The orchestration is handled for us. And all we have to do is use this DSL. So I mentioned the pipeline will halt if steps err. I want to just take a quick aside here and talk about the on halt. The on halt is a lifecycle method, lifecycle hook. There we go. That's the word I wanted to use. It's a lifecycle hook. What it allows us to do is then when like halting is basically just stopping. I don't know. I like the word halt. I thought it was cool. When the pipeline halts, it basically just calls this step. So this step is like any other step in the sense that it's a PORO, it has an initializer and an execute method. But the only special thing about it is instead of like us passing a specific piece of data to it, it gets the error that caused the pipeline to completely fail. So it's nice. It's really handy for, if you, paging an on-call engineer here or like doing some sort of communication to somebody to notify to be like, hey, this pipeline crashed. So this is great because you don't even have to wait for something in like Sentry or Honey Badger or anything like that. You don't have to wait for an error to come through to like be like, oh, something is wrong. You will get like you can have it notify you immediately if the pipeline crashes. But there are so I also mentioned there's more lifecycle hooks. I'm not going to go over them. I'm actually going to leave off the on halt for now, just because again, slide real estate's expensive. So now we get to our human in the loop, right? The review enrichment step. The review enrichment step, just to review it real quick. If the data was invalid or there was some issue with it, we needed a human to intervene and look at that data and possibly patch it up somehow. And then otherwise, we eventually get to that activate account step. So with human in the loop, it's kind of interesting because like we're not branching. We're actually just like it's basically a simple chain, except we have to wait. So that's what happens. Oops, sorry, I jumped the gun. Got too excited. So that's what happens with this. Keeping with the HVAC metaphor, and tell me if this is too much. Instead of pausing, we can dampen the workflow. I don't know. I thought the terminology was cool when I did it, but maybe it's too confusing. There's a pause alias in there too. You can just use that. basically what will happen is as the pipeline is executing, as it finishes the review enrichment step, it will pause the whole pipeline and wait for human input before going to that account activate step. So that kind of solves our human in the loop case. How do we kind of, so like we keep saying human in the loop. What does that actually mean? Like a human's doing something and then like, how does that relate to the computers, right? Well, all we have to do is basically just call resume on the pipeline at the call site at whatever's, wherever the human is actually doing the action. Say for instance, they're reviewing some data, say they have to go and manually edit the data, then they click save or something. So that would be at the point where you would call resume. Maybe you're in a more like SOA service-oriented architecture, something more complex architecture. Maybe you just do it on some event that gets passed in your like message bus or something. But that's all you have to do. You just have to call resume. Once resume is called, it'll then go to the activate account step. Cool thing about resume is you can pass any arbitrary data to it and it'll replace that data. Again, with that like pipelining concept of data flowing into each step. Say we needed data from the user. Say we needed their email for something, or I don't know. Some like they needed, maybe they're like on customer support and somebody, a user needed to call in with a specific piece of data. You can pass that data directly to it, and it'll get passed right into that activate account step. And lastly, we're our activate account and check it, which is just a simple chain. But the astute reader will remember that there was actually a wait 3 days on it. So we had a delay. Delayed for 3 days. And that's it. That's our whole workflow right there. It's so much easier to read. And like it's a nice DSL in my opinion, obviously I wrote it, but it reads well. We start at verify email. We chain to provision account. We divide to our send welcome email and enrich lead data. We combine that and do it review enrichment. We pause before activating the account. Then we finally chain to onboarding to schedule the onboarding check-in, and we delay it by 3 days. It's so much more readable and it's completely codified in a single place now. So, okay, we have this. Now what? Now what do we do? Well, obviously we need to trigger the pipeline or the workflow. We do so just by calling trigger on the pipeline or workflow class. And again, we can pass any positional arguments to it, and those will be passed to the first step in the pipeline. Now, we've been focusing a lot on the DSL, and that was purposeful because I think it shows well, I think it presents well, I think it's kind of cool to look at. But like then what, right? Like, okay, we've defined our thing, we've defined our pipeline, we've defined this workflow, we know how to trigger it, we know how to start it. Then what do we do? Well, this is where Ductwork is like every other job queue. It basically just comes with a simple bin stub or some binary. This one is a bin stub. You'll get it when you run like the Rails generator, install generator. You get this and some migrations and some other things to help set up. But this is it. This is all you have to run. You don't have to like stand up new infrastructure. You don't need to like create a whole new like VPC or something. It's not, if you've used more like typical workflow or orchestration libraries, something like Temporal or even CommandaZB, these things require excessive infrastructure. This runs from just a single executable. It will go and then fork the processes that it needs and then spawn threads beyond that for the worker pools. I won't go into detail there. That's a whole other talk about the concurrency model of Ductwork and how it works and why. But I really just wanted to highlight that like it's just a single executable. It's really easy to run alongside your Rails application, just like you would a Sidekick or Good Job or SolidQ. So what did we gain here? Workflows are now visible and readable. I think this is my favorite. We have a single place that we can see the workflow, a single place where we can read the workflow, a single place where we can edit the workflow, right? Like we can add new steps onto it. We can take away steps. We have a single place where it's codified. It's not like in some diagram that we have to try to keep up to date with code. It's right there. We can read it. Anybody can read it. Each step is isolated and testable. We didn't even really cover this, but like because steps are just poros with like an initializer and a single execute method, like they're super easy to test. You can test them like any other poro. There's really not a whole lot to say about it. One nice thing is, and I didn't mention it earlier, but a lot of these steps kind of follow a functional object pattern. It's I forget who coined the term, but like there's this whole functional objects ideology and patterns. What I'm getting at is because with pipelining again, like the output value becomes the input value. You can actually create nice little contracts within your test between steps just by asserting on return values and asserting on input values. The library handles pipeline orchestration for us. This is kind of the meat, right? Like Ductwork is doing a lot of stuff for us. We were able to remove basically all of the code except for one line, the one line of business logic from our steps. Everything else is handled for us. We don't have to worry about all of those other job and queuing other job issues that we saw before. And lastly, pipeline state is trackable and resumable. We no longer have to keep track of our own state in any way. We don't have to keep timestamp columns on whatever model, like again, could maybe make sense on user, maybe make sense on an onboarding, but we don't have to keep track of that anymore. All of that is there for us. Ductwork ships with a web dashboard similar to Sidekick. And from there, you can see what state everything is in. You can see pipelines that have crashed, workflows that are halted. You can see each step, how long it took, when it started, when it stopped, what completed, if it errored, how many retries it took, all that's tracked for us. And the nice thing, this resumable is actually carrying a lot of weight here. We can stop it. We can pause the pipeline. Say we ship it and we start a pipeline and we realize, oh, actually, this isn't correct, or we gave it the wrong data. We can just pause it or stop it in its tracks and not worry about it continuing. It's a really nice way of being able to interact with our workflow, our state, because before we couldn't really do that. We'd have to maybe munch some timestamp columns or something, but otherwise there's not really any way of doing that, not really any way of pausing it. And that's the other thing I also didn't mention earlier is if we did try to stop the jobs workflow from before, the previous implementation, there's actually a lot of issues in where it will continue even though maybe one of that steps failed. But with Ductwork, we don't have to worry about any of that. Everything just works. I'm Zosutan on GitHub. If you are curious about Ductwork, it's under the Ductwork organization on GitHub. There is an examples Rails application there with example workflows. There is the doc site is hosted on GitHub Pages, so all the docs are there. And then obviously the open source repos there for Ductwork, the Ductwork open source repos there. Keep a lookout. There's going to be a very large 1.0 release of kind of solidifying Ductwork, making it production ready. I'll be shooting out a bunch of blog posts and probably some other materials as well. So if you're curious, keep an eye out for it. But I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you. Yes.
Yeah, thanks, Tyler.
Yeah.
Great talk. And I really like that the problem is actually real. Every company, every project has it. So my question is, in real situations, you usually have a lot of business logic, a lot of if-else conditions, and I didn't see how you handle like this, because usually you don't know like if which jobs will be scheduled next or not, like depending on this. Yeah.
Yes, that's a great call out and something I did forget to mention. So there are more transition primitives, one of them being a conditional. You can be like, it allows you to essentially set keys and then the values to those are the steps. So it's like, depending on whatever your return value is, I go to step A, maybe I go to step B or step C. So there is a way to do conditionals within the pipeline itself, not just like sticking an if else for like one catch-all step or something, and then it fires off steps. Like you're able to do that right in the pipeline definition. There's also basically a for each. So on a return value, we kind of like talked about enriching the user data. Say you want to enrich data for all your users. So maybe your first step is just query all the users that need their data enriched. And the return value of that is all of the user IDs for those users. What you can do is, again, for each that, and basically each of those return values as a scalar will get passed to a specific step. And then there will be a step queued for each of those user IDs, if that makes sense. Sorry, that was kind of a hackneyed. Yeah. All right.
So you build it for your company you're working?
Yeah. So I'm working for myself right now in my own company. Ductwork is its own product under my company. But yeah, I built this out of just necessity, frustration, maybe anger-driven development. It was something that like I needed, and I kept basically re-implementing a lot of like these job workflows and like having to add in a lot of protection around these things to make sure I wasn't, doubling queuing and doing all of these issues that we saw. So yeah, that's kind of where it came from. Yeah, no problem. Yeah.
How would you, what is the logic for recon job?
Yeah, so right now it's really basic. You can configure how many retries it does. More mature job libraries, Sidekick, Good Job, Solid Queue, they have more, they do like exponential back off and stuff. So like the first two retries might be really close to each other, but then it like starts to be longer before each one retries again. That isn't implemented yet. It's just a simple retry, and I think it's like 10 seconds. It'll retry. But that is something I've kind of been like keeping an ear out for is like, do users actually want more controls over how steps are retried? So that's a good question. Did that answer your question though? That was kind of a meandering answer.
Yeah, I mean, I was just wondering if like you actually had some sort of primitive for handling that, or if you're just relying on the user to implement that within the logic computer.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah, so almost like if this step fails out, can it keep going sort of thing, like an optional step? Is that kind of what you're?
Well, it's more so like, because one of the things that you want to avoid is having a job execute another job, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so it's like if a user writes that logic within the job, it's starting on itself. So
I see. Yeah.
You have like a point that can that, so it's abstracted away from having to let that retry logic within the step.
Yeah. So any error that bubbles up will cause the step to retry. So you can say you're fetching out to a third-party API or something, fetching data, and like, network is commonly flaky, all sorts of different network errors that can happen. You could like rescue those and try to retry on your own, specifically, like try to refetch that data, or you can just let the step fail and let Ductwork and the mechanisms there just retry the step itself. So there is the ability to kind of do either, if that makes sense.
Maybe on the retries as well, is there the ability to configure which errors do we retry on versus some errors that we don't want to care about and we just want to fail the step?
Yeah, no. Again, because I've been building this for under a year, so there's a lot of like stuff missing, but like I really appreciate questions like these because this gives me a roadmap essentially. But yeah, it's not supported yet, but something like that totally could be supported because I believe Sidekick does that, right? I'm pretty sure. I'm pretty sure there's other job queues that do that. But yeah, it doesn't do it now, but that could totally be something you would see in the future. Yeah.
When you damp a step, is there the ability, is it conditional damping? So is it conditional pausing? or is it always inevitably gonna be paused? So like
Yeah.
in the step, can you control if I want to resume after or pause? But for example, a human check, maybe if the data is good enough and it doesn't need a human check, I can continue the step. Is that possible?
No. Not yet. Short answer, no.
Pausing the step.
Yes. But you could connect a conditional before that to essentially get that. That is one thing I didn't do. One thing I didn't really cover here, just for lack of time, and again, slide real estate is when you get into like branching, you actually get like it will for some of these methods, specifically divide, when divided to two steps there, everything in that array, you actually can give it a block, and the block parameters are the two branches. So you can actually chain stuff onto those two branches separately. So you could have, you can run two branches for the perpetuity of the workflow, and each of those could do something separate. So that was kind of all in service to say you could have a conditional linked to your dampener, and then that would allow you to kind of like conditionally dampen. Any other questions? Yeah.
Say you have like an established pipeline that you're running, and then you need to add a new step. Steps. Can you do that easily? How does that work with like a pipeline that's already
in progress? Yeah. So I specifically didn't want to like open up the Pandora's box that is versioning. I wanted it like I wanted to keep this as simple as possible. So like other job queues, like Sidekick, for instance, I'll get back to your question. I'm kind of like taking a longer route to get there. Something with like Sidekick, if you want to delete a job, you have to make sure all of those jobs have been executed before. Otherwise, you're going to get like a missing constant error or something, because that job no longer exists, but the data that was in the queue is still there. A similar thing will happen here. So if you're trying to like remove steps, yeah, you could very easily get into like a weird thing where it's like, oh, the step is no longer here. The class doesn't, what? But how Ductwork handles this is it takes this DSL, it normalizes it into an adjacency list, which is a type of which is a way of representing a DAG in JSON, essentially. Workflows are DAGs. That's something I didn't want to get into, or just didn't have time to get into, rather. Directed acyclic graph. Each definition lives with that record once a pipeline is triggered. So it refers to that. It's like its definition at trigger time, to know like where to route and what to do next. So yes, if you were trying to like remove a step, you would have to keep that class around until like all those pipelines are finished. But if you wanted to add a step, that's fine. It won't do it for any, in progress pipelines. So if you wanted to like address those, maybe there's some clever way of handling that. Yeah, maybe there's a clever way of handling that, but basically it would just, any new pipelines that are triggered, that's when it would have that new step added to it, rather than any in-flight ones. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Cool. Yeah.
I know you're like one of the main goals you're trying to solve here was jobs and queuing jobs and it kind of becoming a mess. Have you thought about any guardrails for a pipeline and queuing another pipeline?
No. Well, sort of. Something that Temporal does, and Temporal is just this big giant workflow orchestration enterprise grade nonsense library thing. It has this notion of like kind of what you're saying, like triggering other workflows or encapsulating other workflows. I didn't go down that road just because I was like you could just create two workflows that look similar. It's kind of my thinking. Like if you really wanted to, if you really had a need for it, like just build out the workflow as you need it. and then build out another one. You could trigger another pipeline from the pipeline, from a step or something. And I believe everything would work correctly. But yeah, I mean, are you thinking of a specific example where you would like need to do that, or just kind of?
No, I just know, like it's one of those, like, if you leave it up to the user, they're probably gonna do it, and you're gonna
Sure.
end up
Oh, yeah, totally. Yeah, that's the thing. There's like I obviously focused a lot on like building features and kind of doing that. So there's still a lot of rough edges, with the library. I've done, as much testing as I can, but like until it really hits like production level traffic, I think some of those bugs are gonna have to be sussed out. But as it stands now, I don't see that as being an issue. So I think you should be able to do it. Yep.
A lot of the other job queue managers have some concept of queues, so
Mhm.
that you can assign different infrastructure to manage from each one of those schedules. I'm curious if you thought about that too, the mechanism to say like this pipeline has this level of priority, it should be run before something that is run.
Yeah, there's no concept of priority yet. It's something I've thought about. And I kind of didn't want to implement it. I just didn't feel like it. The deeper I like got into it and was like looking at it, I was like, oh, this is actually like kind of hard. There's a lot of math involved. Yes, it doesn't run like that now. So how it works is each pipeline, each class of pipeline. So probably should have ended on like there we go. So in this case, onboarding pipeline, they are each queue. I guess you could kind of like if you squint real hard and like tilt your head, it kind of looks like a queue. They're each split out by the actual class of the pipeline. So onboarding pipeline has its own set of job workers. Um, Offboarding pipeline has its own set of job workers that way. And I'll get into the concurrency model a little bit. Depending on how you configure it, you can actually have each pipeline be in its own process. So that way you don't have like a noisy neighbor problem. Or like, a problematic pipeline that keeps crashing, takes down takes down all your job workers or something, or like crashes the whole process. And now you have to like restart all these things. You have some isolation there, between pipelines. But yes, there is no concept of priority, which would honestly be like really useful. I've thought about just creating like one giant worker pool and then like it works on anything that's available. And then doing a priority based on that. Like I think there's a lot of knobs and stuff that you could add to it that would allow you to do that. And you could create something really powerful, but I'm not sure I'm not sure which direction I want to go yet with it for something like that. I'm mostly just waiting for people to ask. Um, so so I guess to answer your question, no. But it's something I have thought about.
Sounds like there's at least the ability to say, when I run bin,
Bin Ductwork, yeah.
Ductwork, I can pass like the list of pipelines that I want to be run in that process, and then do another one that's maybe run on a larger bot.
Exactly. Yep. Yeah, that's the nice thing. I specifically made it so you can run multiple instances of the Ductwork entry point process on the same machine, across machines. Like I try to make it as scalable as possible. Speaking of scalability, I'll also just mention there's also a thread-only mode for JRuby and I guess Windows. I think Windows only does threads. But yes, there is a way. I didn't go over. There's a configuration file that comes with it too, and you can specify only run these pipelines, and then in box 2 run these pipelines or run everything. Any other questions? Felix, how do you have a hand?
No, yeah, mine was on the horizontal scaling stuff.
Oh, okay, cool.
Yeah.
So yes, it scales. Yeah.
You mentioned that state is tracked. How is it accessible?
Yeah. So yeah. I don't know why I didn't, but I should have put a screenshot of like the dashboard. You can see everything from the dashboard there. You can see like individual pipelines. You can click into them and then see individual steps, and then you can click into them and you can see individual runs. There is like a little bit of like layering. I'm kind of in the middle of getting design help to make it not designed by an engineer. You could very tell it's like I designed this UI wise. But yeah, you can check it through the dashboard. It's also because it's backed by a database, by a single database, you can actually just query it. I haven't really like put in the documentation what the interface looks like. So you would kind of have to dig a little bit yourself if you really wanted to get into some of the details there. But probably at some point there will be like a public API to it, to where you could just hop on like a Rails console and just be like, Ductwork dot step this. How long did it take, or something like that, and it'll show you those details.
The same data store as the Rails application? It's its own data store, or?
That would be my recommendation. You can run it on the same application data. You can run it in the same database as your application. There's just like scaling concerns, right?
Yeah.
So, but actually the Ductwork website, it uses Ductwork behind the scenes to do a few things. It runs on the same application database just because it's like the pipelines are really small. Yeah, the amount of data that's in the database is small. It's a simple website, so you can do it either way. Yeah.
I think.
Cool. Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate it, guys.
Before I let you go, if anyone has time, we gotta move these tables back to